Hello, I'm Robin Calda, and I'm the Manager of Research and Policy at the Pulmonary Hypertension Association of Canada, and I am based in what is now called Toronto. The land on which I plant my feet is the traditional territory of nations including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and is now home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and settler peoples. In the spirit of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, I recognize my responsibility as a settler to help deconstruct the colonial systems that prevent this land and all lands from being sustainably shared for the benefit of all beings and maintained as a healthy ecosystem in its own right. This month is Registered Disability Savings Plan Awareness Month, and today I'm lucky to be talking to Liss Cairns, who's going to answer some questions about RDSPs. Liss is currently one of the program managers at Plan Institute in BC, and their work includes managing Plan Institute's free National Disability Planning Helpline Service, managing the wills, trusts, and estate planning workshops, supporting the Access RDSP program in collaboration with Disability Alliance BC and BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, and assisting with the Disability Without Poverty movement wherever possible. Liz, did you want to add your land acknowledgement?
Yeah, thanks for that, Robin. And I am delighted to be joining you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla, otherwise known as the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, as well as the territories of the Coquitlam, Stalo, and Katzie peoples.
Welcome. So just so we're all on the same page, can you give a short overview about what an RDSP is and who's eligible to set one up?
Yeah, so the Registered Disability Savings Plan, otherwise known as the RDSP, was designed back in 2008 really to be a almost like a pension replacement for people with disabilities. So at its core, it is a long-term investment savings plan for people with disabilities who qualify for something called the Disability Tax Credit, also known as the T2201 form through the Canada Revenue Agency. This plan is incredible for a number of reasons. One of them being that you can deposit up to $200,000 in the RDSP, as well as receive up to $90,000 of government contributions in the form of grants and bonds, as well unlimited investment income, and all while being considered an exempt asset for all federal programs and most provincial programs. So what this means is that you might have all this money saved in an RDSP and still be able to receive your provincial or territorial income assistance program, for example, ODSP in Ontario, PWD in BC, AISH in Alberta, as well as all federal benefits. So this would be things like your guaranteed income supplement, your old age security, Canada pension plan, as well as the upcoming Canada disability benefit. In terms of eligibility for that, as I mentioned, it is for people with disabilities, so who qualify for the disability tax credit. And really what that form looks at is that you are somebody who has a severe and prolonged disability. So prolonged is probably the easiest to understand. Prolonged means that you have a disability that has lasted or is expected to last for a minimum of 1 year. And then there's also the severe element. So people can qualify as having a severe disability in one of three ways. The first one is by having a marked restriction. This means that you are very restricted in one of the, I believe there's 7 or 8 activities of daily living that the Canada Revenue Agency has set out. So things like walking, feeding, eliminating, which is using the toilet, dressing, mental functions necessary for daily life, other things like that. And so if you're very restricted in one of those areas, meaning you either can't do that activity, you need a significant amount of help to do that activity, or it takes you 3 times or more longer than somebody who's the same age as you, but without that disability to do that activity, then that you would qualify under that section. Um, Otherwise, you can also qualify under the cumulative effects of impairment. So what this one means is that you are disabled a little bit less, but in 2 or more of those areas of daily living. So for example, my wife has a few chronic conditions, and so she's been eligible for the disability tax credit under the mental functions category, but also with restrictions in walking and feeding. And so you can look at how you might be restricted a little bit less, but in more two or more of these areas. And so the total effect of your impairment is equal to one severe impairment. And then finally, if you're somebody who requires life-sustaining therapy, with the life-sustaining therapy section, this is where you would be receiving life-sustaining therapy minimum twice a week, for an average of about 14 hours per week. This could be if you need something like, let's say you need insulin therapy, kidney dialysis, oxygen therapy, other types of things like that. Those are basically the main ways you can qualify.
You said the government contributes to RDSPs as well as people with disabilities and their families, right?
Mm,
So what do I need to
yes.
do to receive the government contributions?
Yeah, so with the government contributions, once you've been approved for the disability tax credit and you go to open up your RDSP with whatever financial institution you choose, there's going to be a form that you're required to fill out. It's got a very wordy title. It's called the Application for the Canada Disability Savings Bond and or the Canada Disability Savings Grant. Those are the formal names for those government contributions. We usually refer to them more as just the grants and the bonds. So the grants within the RDSP, those are some matching contributions. So if you can deposit some money into the account, the government will then match up to $3 for every $1 you put in. But if you're somebody who's lower income and you are, not able to put in money to the account, or maybe not very much, that's okay. If you're someone who is low or modest income, you could receive up to $1,000 per year, just by having the account open. And so that's what the bonds would be. And those don't require personal contributions to get. And so basically, when you go and open up your RDSP, you complete that form and you just have to check the box that says, yes, I would like to receive the Canada Disability Savings Bond and or the Canada Disability Savings Grant. And then once you've completed that form, it's submitted along with your application and registered. And then that's it. Usually the bonds, those are deposited every year in February or March, again, because they don't require you to actually contribute to the account. And the grants, because those do require some contributions, usually those will come in, let's say 2 to 4 months after you make that initial deposit. So just complete that form, and then the government will assume whatever your decision is, whether you say, yes, I want to receive those or not. Some people choose not to receive them. Then that decision will just remain the same until you request otherwise. So that's pretty much it. It's just the same every year.
So I can open an RDSP to receive the bond without depositing anything into it myself?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, the main thing to keep in mind with this is that you must have your income taxes up to date in order to receive that correct amount. So, the way the income threshold works, so there's different income thresholds for the bonds as well as the grants. It makes a little bit of sense when you think about it because the bonds, you don't have to deposit any money, and so they have a lower income threshold to receive those, whereas the grants have a much higher income threshold because you're actually contributing some to the account as well. So for the 2024 year, if your adjusted net family income from 2022 was at or below about $36,000, you would receive that full $1,000 bond, again, just
Mm.
by having your income taxes filed and the account open. If your income was between that and about, I think it's about $55,000, then you receive a portion of that $1,000 bond, getting a little bit less the closer you are up in that income threshold. But as long as you got that ready to go, it should be no problem. And just a note as well, I mentioned that, for 2024, they use your 2022 income tax data. That's really just because at the beginning of the year, that's the most readily available
Mm.
information that the government has to access. And also a kind of a tip to let people know if you are, say, opening an RDSP and you are in your 20s, or let's say you're a parent or guardian who's opening an RDSP for your child, you want to make sure that that individual's income taxes are filed starting in the calendar year they turn 18 years old and or 17 years old and 18 years old. That's because once the beneficiary, so that's the person who's going to actually receive the money from the RDSP when it's time to take money out, once they're in the calendar year they turn 19, regardless of where they live in Canada, the income taxes used are going to be their own. So this means when
Mm.
they're 19, the government needs to see their income tax data from age 17 and age 18. Otherwise, the government is going to assume that they're a high income earner, as they do with even adults who have the account in their 30s, 40s, but don't have the income tax data filed. They're just going to assume you're a high income earner, so you won't get any bond and only the lowest matching grant. So Another tip to share, because a lot of folks don't know that it can cause some issues at age 19 when you're like, why didn't I get any grants or why didn't I get any bond? Could be because the income taxes weren't filed, even if there was
Right.
$0.
Oh, that's a good tip. We had a question from a community member. Are there agencies that will give you a deposit in order to start an RDSP? Because she thought that in the past there was an agency in BC that did that.
Yeah, so in British Columbia, there's Plan Institute, so the organization I work with, as well as our Indigenous partner, the BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society. Both of our organizations offer a free one-time $150 grant to people in BC who have an RDSP. At our partners at BCANS, that is for their clients who are Indigenous, and for Plan Institute, it's anyone and everyone. There is also a program that was started a few years ago in Newfoundland and Labrador by the Newfoundland and Labrador Association of Community Living. And so they also offer a free one-time $150 grant towards your RDSP. Other than that, for people in other parts of Canada, there aren't any other programs that I'm aware of that offer contributions to the RDSP. But please do reach out if you find out that there is one, because we would love to know about that.
Yeah, so if you took that $150 and it was you were low income, it would be matched 3 to 1, right?
Exactly. So it would be,
Okay.
you would put in that $150. The government is going to match that 3 to 1, so $450. So that $150 contribution is a total of $600 towards your RDSP.
Nice. That's a nice start.
Yeah.
So pulmonary hypertension is a chronic and progressive disease that often hits
Mhm.
people in the middle of their lives, sort of in the prime of their life.
Mhm.
Are there any special considerations for RDSPs for people in that sort of situation?
Yeah, definitely. So, with the RDSP, there are a few age components to think about. So, in order to have an RDSP, you have to, qualify for the disability tax credit. You must be a Canadian resident for tax filing purposes. So, if you're eligible to apply for the DTC, that means you're eligible for paying taxes in Canada. Or I shouldn't say eligible, you're required to pay taxes in Canada. As well, you must have a valid social insurance number. But the ages around the RDSP have to do with the grants and bonds, and then also for opening the account. So somebody can open the RDSP up until December 31st of the year they turn 59 years old. That's the last possible year to actually open this account.
Mm,
That's because mandatory withdrawals have to start in the calendar year you turn 60, and so no accounts can be opened after that stage. But to get those grants and bonds, again, that up to $90,000 of government contributions, you actually have to open the RDSP before December 31st of the year you turn 49 years old.
mm,
That's because there's something called a 10-year or proportional repayment rule. And this rule states that if any government contributions have been deposited into the account within the last 10 years, then any withdrawal is going to cause a repayment of some or all of those grants and bonds. And so, really, that's why they have to stop the grants and bonds no later than December 31st of the year you turn 49, because
mm,
otherwise, when mandatory withdrawals happen at age 60, if you're getting grants and bonds in your 50s, you're likely going to lose those when withdrawals take place. So, keeping those age components in mind, somebody who becomes disabled, say in their 30s, 40s, potentially even their 50s, still might be able to benefit from the RDSP. With those grants and bonds, typically it takes about 20 years if you're not looking at retroactive years, because, if your DTC was approved for years prior than the current year, you can catch up on grants and bonds that you missed out on. But usually, without factoring those in, it does take 20 full years if you're contributing the maximum and you're able to get that full grant and bond amount. So potentially, opening it up later in life, you might not be able to get that full $90,000, but as long as you're still, 49 or under, you can still get a decent amount of those. So definitely could be something to look at. And then too, if you're someone who is already in your 50s, it might also be a good idea to open an RDSP, because if you are, let's say, for example, receiving an inheritance or a settlement, or perhaps you just have extra money that you want to save and not worry about it causing any sort of impact on your eligibility eligibility for benefits you're currently or might be receiving in the future. That's one of the most common reasons why people will actually open an RDSP when they're in their 50s. And outside of the RDSP, the disability tax credit in and of itself is very useful to people. There's no age component for that disability tax credit, and that can lead to a lot of other supplemental benefits. So outside of the RDSP, there's also access now to the Canadian Dental Care Plan. As
Mm.
well, in July 2025, there's going to be the new Canada Disability Benefit that's launched, which will be up to $200 a month per person, as like a top up to your existing provincial or territorial income
Mm.
assistance benefits. So even if the RDSP doesn't necessarily fit or make sense in your situation, the disability tax credit could be really beneficial on its own as well.
Mm. So do I lose all of the government contributions if I have to take money out early?
Not necessarily. So, as I mentioned, there is that formula that is available. So, any grants or bonds that have been in the RDSP 10 or more years from the date of withdrawal, those are yours. They're what the government considers vested. So, they're your property. Those will never be returned. So, you would be looking at, okay, let's say we are, October 23rd, 2024. You'd be looking at, okay, what grants and bonds have been received since October 23rd, 2014? So, within
Mm.
those 10 years, those are all the ones that could potentially be repaid. And so they're repaid at a rate of $3 for every $1 you take out. So let's say you have $50,000 in your RDSP, you want to take out $1,000 of that, then up to $3,000 of government contributions could be returned. So that would be a total of $4,000 from your RDSP. So it really depends on how much you're taking out. We know that the RDSP is not a good emergency savings vehicles. So we encourage folks to have a kind of a separate, easier to access emergency fund for when those things come up. But no, not necessarily. It doesn't have to be all that go back. It just depends on your personal situation and how much you're withdrawing from the account.
But I wouldn't have to give back the growth on that, on the government
Correct.
contributions, right? I get to keep that part. So at least I
Exactly.
get to keep
Yes.
a little bit of something.
Yes,
Okay. All
exactly. The
right.
investment income will always be yours to keep. So even if you did come into a situation where, let's say your finances were really tight and, maybe there was an emergency that happened and you really needed, to access that money and you had to repay those grants and bonds, at least any investment income that was earned on those, that'll be yours. So you're still ending up farther ahead than you were before opening the RDSP.
That's good news. Is there any reason not to open an RDSP if your disability is prolonged and severe enough to qualify for the disability tax credit? Like, are there any reasons you shouldn't open one?
Um, I mean, personally, I would say no, but I think other people may disagree. I think the main challenges or the main reason why somebody might not want to open an RDSP is because it is a long-term savings plan. And so sometimes people aren't comfortable with depositing money and having that kind of locked in for,
Mm.
let's say 20 to 30 years, depending on what age they open the account. And so, for example, if somebody is in their 50s and they, don't have additional money that they're planning on saving, the RDSP probably doesn't make sense for them because they're really locking that money in there. And because there are those required withdrawals and lots of withdrawal rules that exist, it might make better sense to have something a little bit more flexible. But I think for most people, having that aside, especially knowing that you can get that free up to $1,000 per year just by having the account open, not needing to contribute anything in order to get that, just having your income taxes filed and up to date, really, I think it's very advantageous. And even if it's something you're not going to touch for a while, as long as it's invested and it can grow and grow and grow, it can really help set you up for retirement, which I know is often difficult to think about right now, but good to get a head start as much as possible.
What misconceptions do you hear the most often about RDSPs that you'd like to relieve people's minds about?
Well, actually, the number one biggest misconception that we hear about is that people think the RDSP is a scam. We often get people who reach out to us and are saying, "Is this legit? How is the government providing us this much money? What do you mean? What's going on? I don't know. This sounds suspicious." And I hear you on that. There's no other plan like this in the entire world. Canada was the first country to develop anything like the RDSP for people with disabilities, and still today in 2024, now over 16 years from the year that the RDSP was created, I believe it is still the only place in the entire world that has something like this.
Wow.
Having a disability is often very expensive. It's estimated that people with disabilities have a cost of living that is 30 to 40% higher than somebody
Mhm.
without a disability. So the RDSP was just one way of the government recognizing it's often expensive to have a disability, and this is one way of giving back and trying to help, provide dignity and support long term for somebody's future. Um, and so definitely just want to demystify that. It is not a scam. It is something provided by the federal government of Canada. It's regulated within the Income Tax Act. This is something that has regular oversight from both the Canada Revenue Agency Registered Plans Directorate as well as Employment Social Development Canada. So it can be a little bit confusing to understand, but definitely not a scam. And very happy to help answer any questions that people may have around that. And then I think other than that, the biggest one is, kind of biggest misconception about the RDSP is that you have to be really wealthy or that you have to be able to deposit money into the account in order to benefit from that. And as we've kind of already been talking about, we know that that's not true, especially if you're within that right age range and you're able to get some or potentially all of those bonds just by having the account open, can be extremely beneficial for a lot of folks who might not have any savings otherwise. So even if you're only able to get, a few $1,000s of that, that's still a few $1,000s more to contribute to your overall financial health and well-being later on in life.
It's- No one will ever turn down a few $1,000s extra, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't.
And the last misconception about the RDSP that I think is important to share is that the RDSP is not meant for somebody who has a shortened life expectancy, either currently or might have that in the future. So with the RDSP, they recognize this is for people with disabilities who have a variety of different health challenges. And so if you're somebody who has a medical practitioner that's able to certify in writing that you're not expected to live past the next 5 years, then you can actually change your RDSP into something called a Specified Disability Savings Plan, or SDSP. And really, this is something that allows your RDSP to basically be put on pause. So you're not going to be able to contribute to it. You're not getting additional grants and bonds into the account, but you can start withdrawing money from that account and not have to worry about repaying those grants and bonds. So it is something that is really beneficial for people who may have that shortened life expectancy coming up to still be able to access that money that they've been saving up for themselves down the road.
And then last question, where can people find out more and get help if they need it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Plan Institute was one of the organizations that was kind of leading the movement to create the RDSP. And so we do a significant amount of work on the RDSP. For example, we operate rdsp.com, which is free for anyone to access. It has an RDSP tutorial, which is very comprehensive, goes over everything that I've talked about, plus significantly more. I think we've got like 4 different sections with at least 10 subtopics for each of those. We also have an RDSP calculator online, so you can go in, put your own information in, see what the RDSP might look like for your personal situation. We also have a blog, other downloadable resources. We've created guides for applicants and for medical practitioners on the disability tax credit. So that is a really great place to connect if you want to do kind of some self-directed learning on this. But of course, we also offer a free national disability planning helpline service. So you can give us a call anytime. The number toll free is 1-844 311 7526. And then we also have an email address that you can reach out to. That's info@rdsp.com. You don't have to come to us just with DTC and RDSP related questions. We do support people with any disability planning topic. If we don't have the answer, we will either find that answer or refer you to the right organization or professional or resource that can answer your questions. So yes, feel free to reach out anytime, and we'd be happy to support you further.
Thanks so much for answering the questions. It's been great talking to you today.
Yeah, you as well, Robin. Thank you so much for having me.